Perhaps before I proceed with my presentation, I would like to also greet all the presidents in the house, the, the deputy presidents, collective leadership of BBC, BE, my CEO from Nature, Human Settlements Family, my colleague from NHBRC, who are also going to be part of the panel discussions, and everybody that is here, and all protocol observed. I believe my salary is now secured. Well, colleagues, when I saw the email yesterday and the topic that was allocated to me, I did a bit of reflection, and I asked myself whether shouldn't this be given to my deputy minister, because the issues are all encompassing and require some kind of a strategic direction. And I hope by the time I finish my presentation, you participants will determine whether I have what it takes to become a minister. I'm joking, I'm joking. Slide one. Just this morning, I learned that the Statistics South Africa will be releasing data on the performance of the economy today. And this data is against a background of 2% contraction in economic growth, and therefore news that are not good, but for people in general, but more for Black and African youth in particular. The presentation that I'm about to make, which has been elevated into a keynote address, does not seek to provide all the answers relating to strategically positioning youth for stimulating economic development, but rather aims to reflect and encourage a conversation which examines the road traveled, lesson learned, and advocates for a strategic reflection of some of the policy directions adopted in the last 24 years. Following slide. But before we can even begin to talk about what those policies were, what needs to be done, we need to have a starting point, that of a brief understanding of where our youth is now as opposed to before 1994. Colleagues, it is a reality that is known that the material circumstances for young people has not improved qualitatively, in as much as there has been strides made in making opportunities available to them. All those factors that were there prior to 1994, the legacy of apartheid colonialism, continues to manifest stubbornly itself in a society that is undergoing transition. In this context, therefore, there are certain characteristics which still shows itself in the new society, that of, for example, of the limited number of young people who make it to tertiary education. Secondly, there is a growing number of out of school and out of work young people, which then contributes to increased levels of unemployment and poverty. The current labor markets still have barriers of entry to young people, particularly on issues related to prior experience when recruitment occurs. And we know that in the demography of South Africa, we are dealing with a population that is fairly young and by its nature, and by its nature productive. Over and above these factors, we still have to see a significant number of young people constituting what we call the entrepreneur class. Next slide. But before we can even talk of youth as cornerstone in stimulating economic development, there are areas that we think we need to reflect on. That is, of understanding the notion of economic development in the context of demand and supply side engineering. What you see here is what is a simplified model of the relationship between superstructure, household markets, household consumption markets, and supply side production. This is a simplification of the organization of society, particularly the economic organization of society. On left, you have household consumptions which define the needs of society. A household that must be able to maintain itself, reproduce itself, and thereby, and in order for it to be able to do all those tasks, it should be able to then have what you call the buying power, the demand. But the demand has to be supplied elsewhere. The supply side is about production, those goods and services that we need to make it throughout our daily lives. And here we're talking of production that takes place in factories that is able to give us food, clothes, and that which we need to make it through society. But the relationship between household consumption and supply side is coordinated by what we call superstructure in simple terms, the state which then regulates economies, the economy and society. It formulates policies, it guides how society needs to regulate itself. And in fact, establish a legal framework within which the supply side needs, the household needs, and supply side production and supply therefore is coordinated. And the actual provision of the needs and the supply side occurs in markets. And it is these markets where exchange relationship to take place between household production and supply side. But the state is not just a regulator of the functioning of markets, household consumption needs. It is also a provider of basic needs. The state itself becomes a consumer of goods and services. And it is precisely this strategic role of the state as a consumer of goods and services that enables it to reorganize society, especially in our society that is developing, but also influence policies in a particular direction. It is the state that is able to produce policies such as using its buying power. It then it develops policies that seeks to integrate those that have been disadvantaged in the past to ensure that as it procures goods and services, it makes it a point that categories of people in society like vulnerable households, the youth, the women, are integrated in supply side production, and therefore reorder also the markets in a way that becomes more user friendly to people, and that goods and services are provided. As we were moving from the apartheid era to the new democratic South Africa, one of the issues that the country had to be preoccupied with is how to then reconfigure the relationship between states, the households, factories, if I put it lightly, and the markets in general, in a manner that meets the developmental needs of society. Next slide. In this context, colleagues, we just need to travel back at the work that has been undertaken in the last 24 years. As we know, there was once a document called Reconstruction and Development Program. I do not know if you colleagues still remember that. It became a rallying point within which society was united to build a new South Africa. And in the context of this document, there were elements of policy provisions that were aimed at reconfiguring how the state were to relate to markets, how as the state was going to play its developmental role in the context of accumulating goods and services to meet household needs, but also the needs of the ordinary people. Then things started to unfold. Faced with global economic pressures, faced with economic uncertainty, faced with the continued devaluation of our currency, arose the question of what is it that needed to be done, because the RDP in its own right was a broad document of policy statements and elements, brief elements of programmatic intervention. Then came what we call the growth and redistribution strategy, commonly known as GEAR. I don't know if you colleagues remember that as well. Became a major point of contention and a major point of vibrant conversation in our society. With the GEAR strategy, the key issue was that of ensuring that we develop macroeconomic policies that will target inflation and ensure that growth is being achieved between the point of 2 to 6% on annual basis, gradually achieved in a 5-year period. But also it was to create an enabling environment for opening up of the economy, resulting in foreign direct investments and removing all those protective barriers, of the apartheid state, to ensure that there's more competition in the economy. This strategy, colleagues, had mixed results. One of the positive outcomes of the strategy was that of stabilizing the currency back then, but also removing some of the protective barriers had a disadvantage in some sectors of the economy, particularly the manufacturing sector. And I'll talk later about some of the challenges that were then experienced by the manufacturing sector. And there was, of course, following the growth strategy was then the new growth path, and now the Vision 2030 and the National Development Plan. In as much as these are various transformation policy interventions, they somewhat represent continuity and provide detail in terms of the work that is being done. So there is consistency. And with that consistency, yes, indeed, there are opportunities and successes registered, but also some of the challenges are still being experienced, particularly the challenge of ensuring that the economy grows and that the economy absorbs those that are unemployed, and that an enabling environment is being created for youth development. Colleagues, in as much as I'm from the human settlements sector, which is part of the built environment sector, we all acknowledge that something has to be done about the manufacturing industry, and therefore any policy projection, any policy articulation in terms of ensuring that there's growth in our society with a youth inclusive growth and development must take into cognizance what needs to be done to revive this industry. Historically, the manufacturing sector grew at the back of the discovery of gold. It began to influence the settlements patterns in areas of the centers of production. It demanded a certain kind of labor which was more stable, but also regulated by laws which will allow a period within which the labor will stay in urban areas. But it began to also reconfigure the relationship of peasants to land, and therefore the transition from the rural areas to the urban areas. Okay. And in that context, in as much as it was growth, it was a controlled growth in the sense that there were also policies that were restricting the movement of people. Set of rights to settle in areas were determined also by the demands of this industry. In as much as back then, the mining industry only needed cheap labor that was migrant and temporary, the demands of the manufacturing industry had had different dimension into how the South African economy grew. And all the leaps and the bounds of the economic development in South Africa were determined in part by how this sector grew. It became a secondary sector in the economy, and its growth projection led to a number of jobs being created, particularly for young people. Back then, however, the level of entry of the African youth, African people, was more at the lowest end of the growth of this industry. But at least there was some kind of job security, settlement security defined by the laws back then. But we are also dealing with an economy, a global economy that was growing, a global economy that was also getting integrated. And by the time we reached the post 1994, the pressures were there that South Africa, in order to survive, has to be part of this global economy. But in being part of the global economy, you also determine the terms within which you then integrate, which what the GEAR strategy was seeking to do. But as I said, GEAR strategy had its own strong points, and it also had its own negative points. And one of the features, as I've said before, of the post-1994 was the gradual destruction of the manufacturing sector as we open up the economy, particularly to products from Asia and China. This led to negative growth of this sector, and from 1992 up until 2014, the extent to which it was able to absorb, to create new job opportunities declined from 17% up to 4%, as reflected in the current study, in the study that was commissioned by the MESITA, undertaken by Development Research Council at UCT. And therefore, if you are to think of any opportunities that must then be created, even from job creation point of view, it is my view, program director, that it is a sector that requires to be rejuvenated. It is a sector that becomes, that needs to be rejuvenated because within it comes a lot of opportunities. But its rejuvenation also requires that we reconsider the extent to which we remove the protective gear of this vulnerable section of our economy. And it does indeed have opportunities, because you see, when you talk manufacturing, it's not just about clothes. It's not just about furniture. It's a sector that services all the subsectors of the economy, whether it's automobile industry, whether it's the airline industry, parts that are required to service aeroplanes and all those things, opportunities for young people. Next slide, please. Coming back home, where I've become more comfortable to talk about, what we have done to date to create an enabling environment for youth and women empowerment. The human settlement sector has designed what we called a youth brigade. And this program has various streams, such as, for example, the service stream, which encourages a culture of service and servicing and volunteerism. But it also has a professional stream and an economic stream. And that's the one I want to focus on for the purpose of the audience. That, as you will recall, in 2014, Minister Lindiwe Sisulu made a pronouncement of ensuring that 10% of projects managed by our development agencies called catalytic projects will be given to young people. Catalytic projects are those projects who are voluminous and build over a 10,000 number of units per annum. They run over a 3 to 4 year period, depending on the target that is to be achieved in that specific project. So with this one, they are therefore strategic in the sense that the bill of quantities are huge, and so are economic opportunities. She went on further to pronounce that over and above this, the 10% that is allocated to youth contractors, 20% of projects, 20% of subcontracting opportunities must be made available to youth-owned contractors. And then over and above that, sorry, could love this, that 30% of projects funded through what we call the Human Settlements Development Grant must be set aside for women contractors. And the last one is part of ensuring that we commemorate the Women's March, and in particular the 9th August, that 1,956 housing opportunities are made available to women in collaboration with SAWIC. Okay. What then would be the strategic outcomes of this intervention? Over and above the set-asides, as I said, we want to reconfigure human settlement value chain to ensure the participation of targeted groups, that is women and youth. But also, as I said, the actual the project set-aside are just the last component of the value chain of human settlements. A lot needs to be unbundled in the manufacturing section, and even in the mining of the projects, of mining of the materials required to build the center. We want to change the whole landscape in the final analysis to ensure that even at the mining site, in the manufacturing site, and the actual building of houses, youth and women participate. That's the strategic outcome. But we also, through these programs, we want to see a visible entrepreneur class playing a critical role in the human settlement sector specifically, but more also in the built environment sector. And of course, the development of provincial development for the professional development of youth and women. We had these strategic outcomes, colleagues, because we commissioned a research in 2014, which we looked at the extent of transformation in the built environment, particularly the construction industry. It was a desktop research mainly done by CIDP, our colleagues in public works. What we discovered, we were not comfortable with. The built environment sector remains largely untransformed. It is the critical task of all of us, government, civil society, and organized youth and women formation to ensure that we break the chain of monopoly capital in this sector. We just don't have any other option if we want to change the country. And what it makes it more sad is the fact that, you see, in the property sector in South Africa is worth over what, trillion rands, dollars, of which the state, the public investment is around 20 billion. Right? Did I do something wrong? Maybe it's my cell phone. The point that we're making here, what is even worse is that in those projects that are outside the public domain, they are dominated by these companies who even wants to have a bite in the 20+ billion which the public taxpayers' money is investing in, just to meet their overheads, thereby limiting the entry of new players. And it is my view that will have to be turned around, okay, through decisive policy and strategic intervention by the developmental state and government. Next slide. And therefore, it's critical that not only do we respond to the supply side of the new players, but we must ensure that the demand side, the support that is given to new players is as such that it empowers them to seize these opportunities. The next slide is, this is just to give you a sense of some of the interventions that we're making to ensure that over and above the set aside, we entice young people to have an interest in the construction industry. What we have here in the next 3 slides are just photos of the work that was done in Robben Island last year to attract young scholars in the school who are in the primary education, to ensure that they have an interest in the work that we do. We may pass all the pictures. Let's go to slide 13 on lessons learned. Thank you. Colleagues, in this MTSF, there are a number of lessons as human settlements that we've learned, and it's our view that these lessons should form as basis of strategic priority in the next in the next MTSF period. We know that the term of government is coming to an end in next year, and we should build in transformatory targets in the next government cycle as we move towards 2013. One of the key issues that I'm sure my colleagues from Human Settlement agree with me, that one of the key lessons is that of the need for a comprehensive and a government-wide new policy direction on implementation guidelines. This must include establishing an interconnectedness of various policy interventions, whether it's by the Department of Trade and Industry, National Treasury itself, which has been a headache. I never said that. And all other departments whose work impacts on transformation. In fact, literally every department contributes directly or indirectly in the transformation targets. Most importantly, I'm of the view that a comprehensive transformation plan and target must also talk to the issue of broadening the participation of young people and women in industrialization program that must lead to a new growth of the manufacturing industry. We are of the view that it's one thing to make projects available, but build the capacity of those that want to come into the system. And I think I had a conversation earlier on some time ago with my colleague here, the Secretary General. I was saying we need to be strategic in how we deal with this. Colleagues, not everybody can be an entrepreneur. Once you crowd in participation in sets aside, you then limit the value add in monetary terms that will allow for certain companies to grow to other levels. In fact, our experience in the work that we did in incubation program in Nelson Mandela, I'm sure you will recall, that if you crowd in participation, yes, you may impart experience, but companies will not necessarily grow. In fact, by the time a contractor is out of the incubation program, he's still in that situation that he was in before he went to the program, let's say, for the experience. And in some instances would have entered into a lot of credit agreements that put the company's liquidity into a problem. The last area which we've learned is that all the developmental intervention must be stipulated in contracting arrangement in catalytic projects. Remember, I did talk about catalytic projects, but sometimes the manner in which we contract with developers is such that we leave it willy-nilly to them to then pursue all these transformative and empowering interventions. And out of these experiences, we're recommending the following. That one, as I said, The existing policy review and environment needs the existing policy environment need to be reviewed and enhanced with better improved coordination of policy interventions. I hold the view that there needs to be a strategic focus on manufacturing, and I'll emphasize this point because I believe personally that this will have a multiplier effect in pursuing transformation targets. Manufacturing industry and the built environment sector, remember, are also on the are part of the same WhatsApp group, if I were to use the language of the youth. But most importantly, my other area that worries me is the extent to which the country invests in public education. And I'm saying we need to ensure that the public education must also focus on entrepreneurship, numeracy skills, science, and technological interventions. This does happen in some of the private schools. But in schools that are being used by ordinary working class communities, we know that there's a crisis of confidence in public education. If you want to invest in young people, you start from cradle, from birth until to cradle, so to speak. It's a lifelong learning experience with public education playing a very, very critical role. And I'm of the view that moving forward, we need to ensure that that area of work is reconfigured to meet the developmental needs. As I said earlier on, colleagues, I'm not here to prescribe what needs to be done, but more share with you the experiences and what I think needs to happen. The rest will be a matter for debate as we proceed with the conference. Thank you.